The following is a conversation between myself and astrologer S.J. Anderson. S.J. is a dear friend, he is a colleague, and he recently put out a video that blew me away, all about the current moment we find ourselves in, involving the beginnings of war. Now, for anybody out there who has been listening to astrologers talk about the big outer planet transits, the transit of Saturn and Neptune, entering Aries, of course, Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus in Gemini, and how the vision of potential rhymes of the past could be manifesting in the present, we all should not be surprised at some of the things we may start to see unfold on the world stage. And as of late, we all know that there has been a lot of development in the war territory in the Middle East, once again, in American politics. Now, SJ is a master at mundane astrology. SJ is a wonderful consulting astrologer. And that is why I consider him a dear friend and colleague, because I have learned so much from him over the years. And on this channel, in the present day, I occasionally will touch on these subjects involving the world, involving mundane astrology. But lately, my focus on my work has not been so focused on that. But in my personal life, of course, like any astrologer, constantly growing, evolving, and learning, this is part of the work. Researching, observing reality, politics, geopolitical movements. How are the planets shaping the world we live in? The world we live in is extremely important. Of course it is. If it wasn't important, we wouldn't be here trying to love and live and grow and expand, which is the ultimate intention, I believe, of the human story. So as astrologers, we focus on things that go on in the world, whether behind the scenes or vocally in our work on YouTube with our students, etc. And considering that I don't really publicly talk about politics or things going on in the world 24/7, and neither does SJ, but as of late, it is absolutely unavoidable to not talk about these things, to not bring on guests or friends or colleagues that know a thing or two about history, to try to make sense of things, to try to educate you out there. Now, as soon as this war conflict broke out the other day in the Middle East, and knowing the histories involved with that particular region, but also just the transits at hand that every astrologer has been waiting to see how they would manifest, I had questions for SJ. I had commentary that I wish to get off my chest as well, including this situation. So the following is a conversation that spans into many different dimensions. We talk about Iran. We talk about these outer planet transits. We talk about Jupiter and Leo. We talk about even Mars retrograde and Venus retrograde coming in this coming winter. And then, of course, we tie this all into our spiritual worldview. And we do our best to help you understand a deeper reality beneath the chaos of the world. So, without saying anything more, I do hope that you enjoy this conversation. And if you are someone who is not interested in politics, mundane astrology, or anything like that, if any of this is trigger worthy for you, then you do not have to watch this. So, that all being said, I hope you enjoy the conversation. All right, man. Well, why don't we just begin then? And, like I said before we started recording here, I recently saw your video on YouTube. And for everyone listening right now, it is March 3rd, right? Yes, it is March 3rd. Yeah. And the eclipse just perfected a little while ago. So I'm still sleeping, I guess you can say. But SJ, not only is it good to have you back, but I loved your video you just put out. So folks, I'm recording this. We are recording this on March 3rd. SJ put out a video on March 2nd. And I encourage you all, depending on when you are watching us right now, to go check that out because, in light of recent events in the world, I felt there's no better person that I know personally, a friend, a colleague, to discuss some of the things that you know and that you've researched for a really, really long time involving mundane stuff. Now, I'm into mundane astrology. I think all astrologers who are doing the work should keep up to date on what's happening, at least in the here and now, and do their homework on things that have happened before. But I can be honest, when it comes to anything involving the Middle East, anything involving Iran, and especially that this particular conflict had eyes on it from all astrologers as a possible catalyst into what all of these outer planet war, quote unquote, transits could mean, that we all were wondering, like, was there going to be a moment that involved this particular nation or that particular part of the world, and how does that look astrologically? How do the details emerge from all of that? Now, just to preface everybody who's listening, and if you watch the intro to this podcast of me just speaking, you already heard me say a few words that, as far as my view on politics and my approach and my work to politics, it's not necessarily my number one focus. So SJ and I are going to try to maturely and thoughtfully talk about this from an objective perspective. And of course, we have our views. And if they do leak out a tiny bit, then so be it. We are human beings in a very, very intense moment in history. And my hardcore audience knows that I have no problem popping off a comment or two, depending on what's being said and talked about. But today, I definitely want to spend the time talking as much as we possibly can, SJ, on this particular moment in time as these transits are beginning to show themselves, whether for positive or not positive. And I just welcome you back, of course. And where is your mind right now, SJ? Like, where are you involving what has happened over the last couple of days? And how do you see this also being tied back to something we talked about? And I heard you say it in the video recently about Uranus going direct in Taurus being a Pearl Harbor activation. And you also said, because people, I think, in the fall were screaming about revolution, revolution, something was going on in the fall. And you even said, well, if there's actually going to be any sort of a revolution or thing that pops off, it'll probably be an eclipse season after the solar eclipse in Aquarius, possibly around the Virgo eclipse as well. But that Uranus and Taurus was definitely something that stuck out to me when all of this happened. But my only thing was, okay, well, Pearl Harbor happened to America, which ignited a response. This is kind of the other way around. But yeah, so where's your head at with recent events and anything you would like to start with?
Yeah, first just to say thanks for having me back, and it's great to be back with you, Joe, and with your audience. And I'm glad to have this conversation with you today. It's weird how when you have conversations and the things we talked about, and now we're here, and it was kind of prescient some of those things we talked about. I'm now remembering we were discussing Pluto direct in Aquarius, weren't we? And I was saying
Hmm.
how it was a big story at that time all over social media because of the ephemerality of some of those conversations. It's just whatever's happening that day. And then it came out in our conversation that let's wait for the eclipse to join Pluto and Mars to be there as well. And that might be timing when there's more events that are revolution based or revolution oriented. I so yeah, that's cool to remember that. Now we're here, and it was true that this eclipse triggering Pluto with Mars is when a lot of events have unfolded. I think about Pluto and Aquarius as transforming structures of reality as well. I don't think it only has to be about like power to the people against their governments or against the oppressive, structures and that they're subject to. I think it can also just be about like what we're seeing now, where there's major changes in the geopolitical worlds that we're bringing into 2026. Things like a might makes right reality seems to be part of what's being born, where governments, particularly America, has taken it upon itself to maybe act in ways that are more of like the Aries archetype, and just kind of do, and not to politicize it necessarily, but I think most objective observers would say it's international law and those legal structures are falling away right now. And what's being born with Pluto and Aquarius, or with Saturn, Neptune conjoining in Aries, is something different than what has existed up until this point. And that part of that key difference being maybe the international legal norms that have restrained nations. It's almost like that's being thrown off and we're entering into something else. Let me just come back though, because I want to say what's on my mind is, it's a major moment. This is a huge deal. That's like the first thing I would say. Like you almost can't downplay what has just happened in terms of how big it is for the collective energy and the symbolic, turnabout of our collective reality. And that video that I released, I was attaching it to a lot of these other major events I've lived through and that I think you've lived through in your lifetime, like 9/11, which was a
Oh,
Jupiter and
sure.
Cancer event, where you
Yes.
wake up and it's kind of the world was one way, and then these events happen, and now you're in a new world. And let me just say one other quick thing, I'll throw it to you, is that the Pearl Harbor resonance, in my view, is it's less about how you get there, and it's more that America has now officially declared war. And that's where I was coming at it with the Pearl Harbor resonance, rather than clearly there wasn't like a attack on America and American soil, but it's that Trump at the podium moment when I woke up and saw that, and I say that in the video, I'm like, it's like the Roosevelt moment where I think he says this day is going to live in infamy. There's often in reality these moments that kind of live, that will remain, like the images that will be repeated in 50 years when people look back at this time. And I think that the Trump podium with the USA hat, it was a white hat, I think with like Navy letters, and he says we're going to do a regime change, war, and American lives may be lost. Like that feels like something that's going to be around, uh, well into the future. So that was the resonance. It's more that and this is how it works, by the way, as you get these echoes. It's never the exact same thing. Like this is a 9/11 resonance as much as it's a Pearl Harbor resonance, as much as it's a Berlin Wall resonance, which is Jupiter and Cancer, as much as it's a
Mhm.
Madon is the other example from Jupiter and Cancer that I mentioned. Like all of these are resonant because they're tapping into the collective energy, and it's major new triggers that we're all now living with. And so that's where I go with that's how I see this. Go ahead, Joe, but that's some initial thoughts here.
Yeah, no, very interesting stuff. Yeah, and Jupiter in Cancer is definitely something I want to, I think, talk about as well, because I mean, literally, I think in a couple of days it starts stationing, and then I think it starts actually moving again in a couple of weeks. So, and that's something I really found interesting because I just started preparing, a video podcast for the channel on Jupiter and Cancer, and you said a lot of really interesting things that I feel like I studied briefly in my studies back in the day, just how in the Thema Mundi, I think you discussed how it's the first sign and how that actually is really important in an ancient from an ancient perspective as being like a builder of reality or something. You said it so eloquently, and I definitely want you to speak to that. And then that Mars actually rules Cancer by triplicity. And maybe for some of my audience, you can maybe explain a little bit more of that, like in a technical sense, but also in this moment we find ourselves in, because a lot of people, they think Jupiter's exalted in Cancer. How awesome. And it is, right? I mean, for some of us, it could actually be emotionally liberating. And I know I've had a lot of great emotional rewirings and stuff. And it's been, I mean, I don't want to say it's all been lovely, but especially after the water trines in the fall.
Yeah.
but, but I found that to be really fascinating because, like, in the heat of such war activation, and we have now Jupiter in Cancer. And of course, you already mentioned a couple of historic things that happened, Berlin Wall and 9/11, of course, was a historic moment. And the Cancer archetype just generally alive and well in that. But yeah, like how are you viewing Jupiter in Cancer, which to many people who are just casual astrology enthusiasts or students may not even understand the depth of Cancer or even Jupiter, and especially during a time where the world is being altered, like in a historical sense.
Yeah, it's major. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so major because first of all, it's a cardinal sign. I just want to say that, and everybody out there should know, four of the signs of the zodiac are what we call cardinal signs, meaning new things break through. So you can think about it like that's when the seasons. It's actually this is the beauty of the tropical zodiac is that the sun enters these cardinal signs as the light has major shifts, the solar light and how we experience the solar light. So the summer solstice is when the sun, we have the longest day of the year in the northern hemisphere. And after that solstice point, the days begin to get shorter. And before that solstice point, the days are getting longer. So these are points of literal pivot into new worlds based on just what we witness with the light in our reality day to day. And so, this is a big part of why Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, and Aries are signs that whenever you have longer term cycle energies there, immediately you have to think, all right, what's being born new? What is being initiated anew? And I think that's another part of the moment, not to come off the Cancer conversation, but during this whole time, right, we have Neptune and Saturn
In a
both in
cardinal.
Aries,
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
re-entering Aries and making
Hmm.
conjunction in Aries within a compressed 3 week period of this same, or a month now, or a month and a week with Neptune's entry into Aries on 26 January, I think it was. So it's not just the initiations of the cardinal axis with Jupiter that we're experiencing right now. It's this Saturn Neptune stuff too. But back to Cancer. Um, and so that's one and very, very important layer why Cancer is so important. It's the birth of new things, the start of new things, the shift of energy into new worlds. The sign Cancer itself, though, I mean, and there's so much more we could talk about. So I would just want to say this one other thing about it, which is it is mother. It's the womb. And so we've all come from a womb. This is why it's hits to the core of reality. It's one of the most powerful things. I think about it regularly because of how powerful it is. But I emerged from a womb. My mother came from a womb. Her mother came from a womb. And, or, birthing person, if you, there's a womb carrier that we all emerge from, however you want to say that. And that is, profound when you consider it. And the zodiac sign Cancer is the zodiac sign that captures that profundity because it's ruled by the moon, which is the body and the maternal energy and all of it. So it evokes the notion of these maternal lines that go all the way back to whenever humans were invented or created. And so it hits to the heart of kind of what we are. And geneticists know that we have the DNA that comes through the maternal. You may have studied biology or genetics. I didn't really, but I know that there's a matrilineal side to even that analysis that can sometimes be more important in terms of what we learn from DNA structure. But so the one final thing I'll just say is that Jupiter is said to then rule Cancer. And I think there's a whole conversation that we can have if you want about what actually Jupiter does and is and how it functions. And I've always said that it's Saturn and Jupiter are like a pair, kind of like the sun and the moon are a pair. And Jupiter can often be Saturn-like and Saturn can often be Jupiter-like. They work together. And they work together in the sense that they can be bigger shifts in the reality. One way of how they work together is that they both signify larger scale energies, and it has to do with their orbits. Jupiter's 12 years, Saturn is 30 years. And so they're longer term triggers or revealers of reality. Saturn can often be a little bit tougher and harsher. Jupiter can be sometimes less so, but I think they both can bring us into showing us challenge and showing us the kind of true nature. They both sort of function like that. And so, and yeah, there's a few more layers. I don't want to keep going, but like if you just
Sure.
think about
Sure.
those layers, the maternal and how we all come from, the maternal energy and how fundamental that is to reality. And then Jupiter being a kind of slower moving revealer of the true nature of what we're in. And then the initiating version of that, that's some of some more of how I think about that and why I think it's so important. The video, I go into some other layers.
Oh
I can
yeah,
keep going,
sure.
Joe. I don't want to
No,
just
I
keep.
know. No,
This is
I
a
know.
huge topic, man.
No, I know,
There's a
man.
bunch of
It
layers to
really
this
is.
one. Yeah,
It
yeah.
really is. It really is. But in the context of like the war that we're seeing now, and again, Jupiter really only has like 4 months left, maybe, before it gets into Leo, which is something else maybe we could talk about too, because Jupiter will go opposite Pluto right before a solar eclipse this summer, which will be huge.
Yeah.
And that's something I also talked about with Catherine Urban last week, and she had some pretty awesome insights on that too. But just generally, Jupiter in Cancer in a time like now, like what do you think it's revealing? How is this playing a role with Saturn and Neptune obviously being the war drumming planets at the moment from one perspective that's initiating, for example, Trump to just be so impulsive to be to be dissolving the rule of law. I mean, one perspective, Neptune could be dissolving some Saturnian structure that was once there, and we're now into this battle involving that. So I mean, and everything is still hazy because Saturn and Neptune are so close. And of course, Pluto is activated by sextile. And then Uranus, well, maybe we could talk about in a second as it gets into Gemini. But as far as the Cancer stuff, because I just want to stick on that for a second, how do you think Jupiter is playing a role in this, considering that so many people look at Jupiter in Cancer as something that is a little bit more positive in nature, which I'm sure there could be some positivity at somewhere sprinkled in this, but I mean, where do you think this particular moment in time with Jupiter in Cancer, how is that shaping some of this?
Yeah. So I think home is a big idea with cancer and politics, of course. That is a central concept in modern political institutional structure and even probably ancient. But the idea of that we have this home and we will defend this home. Right. This is a core Cancerian idea that you will fight to defend the home. And so I think this is a big part of what when Jupiter is brought to bear on the Cancerian idea, core idea of home, you're kind of you get shown just the full extent of what the home is and what people are willing to do to protect it and how they think of it. And this, of course, can cut both ways, right? Because you have disputes about whose home is what. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of what we have in the Middle East. I mean, there's
Sure.
certainly, you talk about the Iranian regime or the mullah or the ayatollahs there. I mean, they have a whole different concept about home. So from their perspective, they're going to be defending their home right now in a Cancerian sense that
Mm-hmm.
they've been attacked, and the Jupiter revelation for them is okay. We've now prepared for this, and it's time for us to use Jupiter to defend our home. Some of this comes back to the crab archetype, which is the crabs have pincers, right? That's the Mars idea. The crabs are almost prepared for war, right? They have a shell. So it's like the nature of the crab is that you have a home, the shell that you're in, and you're kind of defending it and protect. It's like a protection and defense model. And that for those out there, the crab is the glyph for the glyph of Cancer is the crab, and all zodiac signs have one image that they could attach to the zodiac sign. And just to say, from the other perspective, right? Israel, USA, their idea of defending home is that they have to attack this nation because if they don't, the home is threatened, right? So a lot of times you get these nationalistic versions of Cancer when you bring the Cancerian archetype into the context of politics or nation states. And I think it's worth mentioning here that the United States in the Sibley chart, which is the chart we use, July 4th, 1776, Sagittarius rising, it's like 5:14 p.m. Philadelphia. There's a Cancer stellium with Jupiter in Cancer. And so that's another reason why I think uniquely for America, you're getting this trigger of, protecting the home. And you go back to 9/11, of course, the aftermath of it. I mean, you think about Bush in some of those early press conferences saying, you're either with us or against us. I think that was one of the famous speeches. But what he was standing like at ground zero with the baseball hat, and there's some like real rabble rousing kind of nationalistic speeches right in the aftermath of that. You can think of the World Series first pitch, I think, in October was at Yankees Diamondbacks, I think.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that's the famous thing where he throws a strike. And of course, he owned the Texas Rangers where I'm from. I met George Bush. I was up just to watch a Rangers game, and he was walking in when this is before he was even governor of Texas, and got his autograph and everything.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's an aside.
Yeah.
The point is that this cancer, you see how this is the other side of the maybe mundane astrological cancer,
Sure.
where
Sure.
you're really into the truth of it's our home and we got to it's both like this enlivening idea, right? Because people organize, this is the way human beings organize collectively. We've got a home together, our flag, right? Our nation or our flag. You almost don't organize in terms of mundane application of the zodiac sign Cancer. You can't have a nation without this appeal to the home of the group home kind of idea. So that's where I think it comes in this context.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that resonates so much. Yeah. And just to maybe say one thing in reference to the video you put out to involving, because, maybe we could stick on Iran for a second more,
Mm.
and then maybe we can like trickle into something else involving maybe the repercussions of what this could be or what the transits might suggest after this. But I mean, these transits in the sky right now, they have a reverberance to other times in history with Iran specifically. So I really found that really fascinating, of course, in your video. So I mean, is there a way you can just break down like as quick or as long as you'd like to on that? And because yeah, then of course we'll move on to I definitely want to talk about Jupiter going into Leo with Pluto for a second after that.
Yeah,
But yeah, like can you break down just a little bit of the
yeah,
reverberance of things that have happened before?
you got it. Let's just focus on
Yeah.
Saturn and Neptune conjoining, because this is the
Yeah.
one where there's some really clear reverberations. And just so everybody knows out there, it's a 36-year cycle, 35, 36 years. They stay in the same sign for 3 years because Saturn is moving 3 years in a sign. So you really get these little pockets of like 3 years every 35 to 37 years where what happens is there are two planets of deep. Saturn is deep structure in the reality, the foundational layer that the society is built upon, like a home has a foundation, that's Saturn. Neptune is dissolving what we think is real, and then you get new realities that are then possible. So both planets are almost reality creating. And when they combine, my sense of it from the research I've done is that we create new realities that can often last for even one 36-year cycle or sometimes a lot longer. And it can be technological or geopolitical. And you can, from that framework, then you can apply it to a lot of areas, but it gets really interesting in the Middle East in particular, because I like to start with 1917 and the Balfour Declaration. So Israel as a country does not exist in our modern context until 1948, but and this is after World War II, and the UN has a resolution that then, from that resolution, Israel and Palestine are created. That's 1948, but a lot of people, or some people, don't know this. That all actually begins in 1917, the year that Saturn and Neptune conjoined in Leo, 4 degrees of Leo, during World War One, where the British government promised um, Lord Rothschild, as a representative of the Jewish people, a homeland in Palestine. I mean, there's a letter, you can just go read it. Balfour was a lord, a British lord that was representing the British government, and it's called the Balfour Declaration. And it's a letter. It says, "To Lord Rothschild, we promise you this homeland in Palestine." So I think that's important context, because a lot of what's happening in the Middle East, at least to some commentators, right, has to do with Israel and its viability and its safety and maybe its growth. And so that's some of this context. We know that we can launch into all this. I'm not even trying to make a judgment one way or the other politically on it, but these are just facts. I mean, we know that like Bibi Netanyahu has been saying Iran, Iran, Iran for like 30 years. You can get clips right now going around where he's just saying it like every year he says it, or we have to stop Iran. So we know this does relate to Israel as a nation state, the idea that you need to stop Iran, and that they were the ones to attack. If you see the latest updates from Rubio, they're saying that America only attacked with Israel because Israel was going to do it anyway. And so if America didn't join Israel, it was going to have to anyway because Iran would have hit American bases. If you buy
Sure.
that or not, I don't know. But the point is, I think Israel is a huge part of what's happening right now. And it was the genesis of this version of it was 1917 Saturn Neptune. So there's only a couple more. 1953 Saturn Neptune conjoined, and 52 and 53 triple pass conjunction that time. That was the next time from 1917 in Libra. And that is when the CIA and MI6 overthrew the democratically elected, this is what they say, right? The Democratic, I think it's without even examining that election, this guy Mossadegh, who was a socialist in Iran, and he nationalized the oil as soon as he was elected, and they just took him out because British Petroleum's profits were threatened by a nationalized oil system. A lot of this, Venezuela, like this has happened recently with Saturn and Neptune so close in our timeline. And this was part of the conversation because Venezuela took the oil, and it's like, who gets the oil? That's a huge part of it. So, okay, but the reason why that's so important is it's literally Western countries and America in particular intervening in Iran or attacking Iran in 1953 and altering the course of history there. Because what happens is that the Shah, which is a family that's been there for even before 1953, but it's like the royalty of Iran. They're backed and they're put in power from 53, the Shah of Iran, 53 to 79. And what happened in 79? This isn't Saturn and Neptune, but it's a side note. It's huge in Iranian history. The Ayatollah, I'm not going to try to pronounce the names. There's two of them.
Hmm.
The names are the same. One has KHO. This is the one that came in 1979. Khomeini, I think, or Khomeini. I think you don't pronounce the K. And then in 89, when Saturn and Neptune conjoined in Capricorn, triple pass, that first Ayatollah died, and they replaced him. They elected to replace him with the one that was ruling Iran from 89 until 2026 when he was just killed in these strikes. And that's Khamenei, I think. Khamenei, but it's an E, it's KHE. The point is, Saturn and Neptune conjoining have triggered, like, these are some of the common themes. Like, Israel's a big part of it and its genesis or its vitality. You have Western interventions into Iran has been a part of previous ones. And you have change in the leadership in Iran, a death of an Ayatollah, previous ones. And so now the one we've just are living through now, but it perfected its conjunction on the 20th of February, included all three of those things. Questions of the vitality of, the state of Israel as it's currently constituted, the death of an Ayatollah, and Western intervention into Iran. So all three of those things are repeated that were present in previous Saturn-Neptune conjunction cycles. That's a kind of short summary of it.
Yeah, no,
One
cool.
layer.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate you breaking that down. It's important to understand. Now, what do you think Saturn and Neptune as archetypes or as planets, as spirits, whatever, what do you think it is about those two that have triggered this particular pattern? Like what do you, because now, I mean, obviously we're in Aries now. We could definitely be talking about the aggression of what war could be for sure, but all those other conjunctions happened in other signs. So what do you think Saturn and Neptune represent specifically?
Well, I think this is what I would say on that. One idea, at least, is that Saturn of the traditional classical planets. I think it's very important
Hmm.
to think about Saturn what it is from the history of astrology and the history of the human perception of the sky. That is that for thousands and thousands of years, Saturn was the final planet. It was literally the doorway to God, and it was the encasement of this reality, out from which you entered into these divine realms. So Saturn was that door, you might say. And what is Neptune? Well, it is actually the last planet. And I know people, there's debates on this, but I mean, astronomically, Neptune is the final planet. There is no other planet outside of Neptune. Now, there's a bunch of dwarf planets, and I'm talking just astronomically. This is what astronomers will say. There's 9 dwarf planets that we know of right now. There's 5 that are officially recognized, Neptune being one of the officially recognized dwarf planets. But there's 4 others that, when you get into the astronomical literature, they pretty much all agree there's these 4 other dwarf planets. So there's 9 dwarf planets. And it's important to note that Neptune is actually the final planet from this astronomical way to view. And therefore, Neptune is about an edge of a world or a boundary. There's even terms, the trans-Neptunian objects, which include a lot of these dwarf planets, because Neptune is that gateway. And so I think they're both then representing that similarly. It's the edge beyond which is something different, strange, and not the reality. Like they both are reality containers and definers. And so when they come together, it's like you get a doubling up or a magnification of that theme. Reality has to be defined. They both are that, and they join to do that uniquely with their combination. And just to say, there's other things, the technological side, like people will find this really interesting. First electric grid in 18, don't miss, people may, it's 1881, I believe, or 1882. This was at Edison in New York City. In 1953, the hydrogen bombs, and the first computer, the first commercially available computer. In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee writes the paper about the World Wide Web. So, and then now we have AI with our version. There's a bunch of stuff in AI recently that's happened. So, just as an example of what these two planets can do together, that's why I say that
Sure.
they really create
Sure.
our reality, and they kind of move reality forward, both geopolitically and technologically.
Yeah, and I think that's also something I've been talking to my students and audience a lot about too, just on a personal level. Like there's this opportunity, I think, for all of us with Saturn and Neptune. I think we're all trying to restructure a new vision or a new reality for who we are. Maybe it's specific to the Aries whole sign house or whatever aspects, whatever's going on in your chart. Of course, the outer planets are going to play all those parts of your chart are going to be speaking to Saturn and Neptune too in these early days. And it is profound. Like we're seeing that, of course, collectively too. There's this effort to dream something new into being, and which is both beautiful and poetic and scary in times of war, of course, depending on who's trying to dream what into being. And yeah, I mean, and when it comes to, of course, I guess this conflict, I mean, who knows if this is the conflict that starts whatever many astrologers have feared. Hopefully, we don't see anything come to too much intensity like the past. But that's another reason where I really wanted to have you on, man, because I feel like I felt the passion in that video that you were speaking to, maybe two particular timelines where this could go. And one of them, of course, is dealing with the pain of the reality of conflict for a couple of years, maybe a little bit longer, maybe until Saturn gets way too far away from Neptune, maybe when it gets into Taurus, or maybe even when Uranus gets out of Gemini. So, what are some of the things you're thinking about when it comes to, again, maybe these two possible scenarios, but also, what are your thoughts on Uranus going into Gemini soon? Because obviously we were just talking in the beginning about Uranus at the end of Taurus being a trigger, at least for Pearl Harbor. That was a big one in the recent past. I don't know if there was something that happened before then, like if there was another rhyme in history, but the Pearl Harbor one seems to be really significant. And as far as it going into Gemini, I mean, again, I feel like the collective nervous system is going to be activated too. So I think there is kind of a moment maybe where we have to be ready for that kind of shock wave from a Gemini, situation. But where are you thinking involving the progression of maybe Gemini? I mean, Uranus going into Gemini next, and again, just how you're possibly viewing the timelines.
Yeah. My sense, because of the astrology getting deeper and deeper into cycles that have been evocative and have seen war. Okay, that's let me preface all this. It's as astrologers, what at least my style of mundane astrology, I call it cycle work. And this is just my favorite way to do it, which is you just say when was a planet in a sign before and before and before. So you'll get many of these pockets of time. And then what you do is you go look at history and you see, okay, what are these repeated patterns that you can see? And often they're very striking. And then you can distill into energetic theme with a planetary cycle in a sign. And this is very potent with outer planets because they have longer cycles. Uranus is an 84-year cycle, Neptune 150, 160, and Pluto 240. So these are the common big outer planets that most people have been focused on, and the cycles of these planets. And so when you do that work for all of the cycles that we're in now, they are times of tumult. They are times of change and tumult and birth pangs in the outer world. And I can go into a few, but things like the Revolutionary War is a great example. Neptune or Pluto and Aquarius, like we have now, Uranus and Gemini. That was a time of great change, and there was wars, and reality created a new thing, the United States of America, and love it or hate it, the expression of these ideals of the Enlightenment, right? That all men are created equal and they're endowed by their creator of certain unalienable rights. Like all that's a Uranus and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius breakthrough into new realities and new intellectual expression, new linguistic and intellectual expression of freedom and human experience. So we're living through that resonance. You've got the Civil War, which is Neptune and Aries. And mind you, let me just come back. Pluto and Aquarius has just started, and the Revolutionary War took time, and it was in the middle of Pluto and Aquarius when it finally birthed the U.S. Constitution, and Uranus and Gemini took time, and so um, Neptune, just to quickly, without going into it all, Neptune entered Aries the day, I think either before or after, I can never remember that correctly, of the Civil War beginning in America. And Uranus was in Gemini during that time, kind of newly in Gemini. And then we have the period in the 1940s, which is Uranus and Gemini in 42 until like 49. And that was a few years before it ended in 1945. So I guess it's a long way of saying I do think we have to be prepared for a scenario where this is just kicking off, and we may be getting more of this here in 2026, one way or the other. And this is where you have to defer to experts. I mean, I'm not an expert on war or geopolitics, and there's a lot of experts out there, people that are trained or studied or professors or historians, and I would just see what they're saying, stay in tune with what they're saying. And when you do that, there's all kinds of scenarios being discussed, like a longer term engagement, ground war. I mean, came out today. They were saying troops are not off the table. I think Pete Hegseth, the Department of War, which I can't still believe they changed the
I know
name
we
to
live
the
in
Department of
bizarro world,
Defense.
folks. We live in
Yeah.
bizarro world, and if you don't think we do, then maybe this is the time you stop watching. But I mean, because I mean, yeah, it's absolutely insane what's happening now, and I do think there'll be a ground war. I don't know how long that's going to be. I think everything Trump says you have to believe the opposite probably. And one thing I can say, yeah, and everything you just said, yeah, I am in complete agreement with just the way those outer planets, listening to the experts, of course, in those historical time periods, tracking what Uranus in Gemini just represents generally, for example, too. I mean, I do feel at a certain point I'm hopeful with what Uranus and Gemini can bring us in an information intellectual space. So I think there's a lot to learn after all this is said and done, for sure. And I mean, I'm also just very much interested in knowing what Jupiter and Leo is going to be like too, especially what can be triggered this summer before the solar eclipse in Leo and that opposition to Pluto. Now, of course, I mean, we're not psychics with crystal balls and we can't predict or say anything too specific on what that means. But I mean, if we look at Pluto as that force of power and powerful, maybe figures, maybe from one perspective, and we have that epic opposition, but then also Jupiter and Leo has a lot of beautiful historical resonances as well. So how are you looking at that? Because I mean, I think we talked about Jupiter and Leo last time, but we didn't talk about the opposition, I don't think. And I don't think we really got into the weeds on maybe the eclipse energy. And maybe it's too early to even be thinking about it. But I mean, because again, we don't even know the details of what's going to unfold over the next couple of months with this particular war. Like, what does this actually turn into? But What are you thinking about summer energy from now?
Yeah, let me just say one other quick thing about Uranus and Gemini, because I have
Yeah,
a video
sure.
on my channel, and not to plug my channel. I mentioned this in a
No,
recent
definitely plug
video,
your channel.
but
Everyone go
um,
follow SJ, please.
I got invited to speak at a conference. My friend Wade Caves invited me. This was a conference he had put on. I think he's still doing these, but it was like a mundane astrology, or I think I forgot what they're branding it as, but basically they invite these astrologers to come speak about mundane astrological topics. So this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And my whole talk, and I put a lot into it, was tracing Uranus and Gemini, the last three cycles, by exact degree. And I went through all of those wars and I said, where exactly was Uranus when they began and ended? And what I discovered was that, if I remember correctly, that World War II Uranus and Gemini was one where the war ended a lot quicker. It ended in 1945. It was only like 3 years of Uranus and Gemini before ended. And so that was hopeful because it meant that in our timeline, if it is going to be a longer protracted war, we might not have to wait until 2033 when Uranus leaves and finally enters Cancer. It may be that we can get this war phase completed in 2028, 2029. And the exact degree, I think it's 16 degrees is when, if I remember, when World War II ends, it's Uranus at 16 Gemini. And I think in our timeline, that's 2028, 2029, something like that. That's like the least desirable scenario in my view, but that's also, just looking at the history of Uranus, an optimistic scenario, even if it is running long here. I just hope we can get it done by the end of this decade. I just think 2030 is also when Jupiter is opposite Saturn, and that's a 20-year cycle. And Jupiter and Saturn often those oppositions. So we had the conjunction in 2020 that triggered a lot of what is happening now, because it was the COVID times, obviously, but the Russia Ukraine, uh, which is 2022 February, that's Saturn in Aquarius, and I think that's a big part of what was initiated. And maybe
Hmm.
in the opposition, we're going to shift, hopefully, maybe into not war. We've pretty much been have had global warfare, and I know it's not officially World War III, but there's been like global war efforts in Russia and Ukraine, and then in Palestine, Israel. Like that's a huge part of our reality. And I'm just thinking that opposition of 2030 might time with some of the Uranus and Gemini exact degree hits where hopefully it can resolve. So I just wanted to say that, just to complete that conversation about Uranus and Gemini. Let me come to the Leo stuff, Jupiter and Leo. Yeah, it's a major deal. One of the quickly, one of the most important things on my mind with it is it's the Jupiter Saturn cycle. And people have to be aware that it's a 60-year echo. And this is important in financial astrology, by the way. Some people are very locked in. This guy Gann, W.D. Gann, one of the most famous financial astrologers, he was keyed into the 59.5-year Jupiter Saturn resonance cycle. I found it to be highly accurate and always worth considering to ground where we are in our timeline. And what was happening in 1967 in 1968 when Jupiter was in Leo and Saturn was in Aries last time? Well, massive anti-war protests. And so this has been a major thing in my view, is like, how are these going to grow? I always knew that if there was war with Uranus and Gemini, there would be an anti-war, right? That's just how reality. There's always a counterpoise. And I think in the American politics, it's also worth noting that Uranus and Gemini and Neptune and Aries during the Civil War, a lot of astrologers have been saying, where's the Civil War? Where's the Civil War resonance? We haven't really quite seen that as much. But I think one thing I'm really watching is, if you combine resistance to war with civil war, it just feels like there could be some potent, domestic anger about what's just happened. I mean, I've like left I haven't really said anything about personal politics, but I'm not happy about it as an American. I mean, and I alluded to some of this in that video. Like, I've seen it in my family. I mean, father in Vietnam, grandfather in World War II, one grandfather. It's horrible what war does. I mean, both of them were like psychically harmed for years and years, grandfather for the rest of his life, first wave D-Day, Normandy Beach. And my dad, and I'll come off this personal anecdote, but I mean, he didn't take a gun because he didn't want the karmic repercussions. So he was in Vietnam and in the Air Force trying to avoid the violence because of, and he never used it or anything, but just one time his little region got shelled. And said it took him 5 years to psychically reintegrate into society after he came back from Vietnam, 1968. So this year that we're talking about. And so I've just seen the harm, the psychic and kind of spiritual harm of war. And I think a lot of people understand that. And then a lot of people hate Trump. And I'm not saying that I like him at all, because I'm not a Trump supporter, but I just think it's ripe, is what I'm saying, for like the intuitive sense people have that war is hell. I said that in the video, and that um, Trump is, problematic for on a whole host of levels. Let alone, we haven't mentioned Epstein. That's some Saturn Neptune revelation for a new foundation as people wake up to, the
Sure.
governing
Hmm.
structures. But I just think so. Just it's ripe for like that's where I'm thinking about the summer. Like, how is this going to be? How is the body politic domestic going to respond to what's happening? And wintertime is not really good for that. It's summertime, remember. That's what's going to happen, where everybody can go outside, right? And that, I think there can be some, I guess, let's just say, protests and resistance to what's happening at some level. I'm watchful of that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think 2026 is the year the fireworks actually go off in the sky and blow up, where 2025 was more of the anticipation, the revisiting of old stories, Saturn and Neptune going back into Pisces a little bit. I mean, we were still existing in this one foot in the old world, navigating whatever fog and old things we needed to uncover, whatever the case may be. But I think you're right. I think there's going to be a response and a rebellion to a degree. I don't know what that's going to look like. Is it more no kings protest type of deals? Is it, who knows what it's really going to be? And then, of course, as we get into even a year from now, when we have when we have a more powerful solar eclipse in Aquarius, I think that's something I talked to Catherine about in February of next year. Like once we get through the summer into the fall midterms, if we just talk about this in American political terms, like that's going to be a defining moment of possibly a massive shift of power. And then how do the people in power now handle that? So, and then again, even again, not to refer back to Catherine and our conversation from the other week, but she was even looking at Venus going retrograde in Scorpio as a continuation of like something maybe involving Epstein. But again, but also just other deeper things that can have a lot to do with just the future political moment. And again, whether we're in a war or what the war looks like, that Venus retrograde is actually like really important. And yeah, I mean, I know we weren't planning on talking about Venus retrograde, but do you want to talk
Okay.
about that real quick? And then I actually want to talk to everyone, guys, for everyone out there. SJ and I want to just talk real briefly on how we can ground some of these things that are going on in the world and and maybe get a little bit more spiritual with ourselves and just to understand how astrology is not necessarily a spiritual path in my view. It's a tool to define reality, and there could be a comfort in understanding that, but also maybe SJ and I will just talk about how we handle difficult things. And because I know you and I have both had a pretty interesting life, probably going through some difficult things ourselves. But yeah, I mean, what is your thoughts? Yeah, let's just talk about Venus retrograde for a hot minute. Because I mean, I enjoy talking to Catherine about it. But how are you feeling about that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I want to talk about that, but let's layer in Mars retrograde too, because I'm seeing them as a pair.
Oh,
Actually,
right.
Mars is
Right.
going to be in shadow while Venus is in shadow at the same time at the end of the year. And
Right.
Mars enters Leo, the sign of its direct station, in September. And so the second half of the year is like both this Mars Venus retrograde stuff, which I think is profoundly important as
Yes.
resets, reality resets, let alone that Mars will triple pass over Trump's Mars ascendant
Mm.
conjunction in Leo. So, I mean, that's a whole thing about Trump having to maybe get there's all kinds of stuff out there right now. I mean, I saw something just today that he's got, I guess, some rash on his neck, and people were saying it's MRSA. I don't,
Who
who
knows?
knows what's
Who
going out
knows?
there, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
people have been concerned about his health, that thing on the hand, and where he had, I guess, some bruising, and people are saying that's a sign of this or that. I mean, I don't want to conjecture too much about exactly what will happen or anything with his health, but I mean, Mars retrograding over the ascendant, he's going to have to like review the self, rebuild the self. That could be heavy energies of like having to reconstruct the self. And what might that mean in his context? Well, what if there is impeachment? I'm seeing people demanding impeachment, by the way. And this is the interesting thing about American politics right now, is that its schisms on the right are almost more interesting than the stuff on the left,
Oh
because
yeah. Oh
the
yeah.
right has been completely divided over this. You have
Oh
like
yeah.
Tucker Carlson, comic Dave
Hmm.
Smith, Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens. Those are some more fringe voices, but even in the more non-fringe voices, they're very popular voices though. They hate Trump now. They all hate him because they see him as having sold out his promise to be a non-regime change war president. And of course, the Epstein files didn't help. And so I think that definitely I see second half of 2026 and into 2027 as major pressure around for Trump around, him using his natal chart himself. But then at the same time, with Uranus and Gemini and Neptune and Aries, both Civil War outer planet resonances, I just imagine there can be some fissures and some continued breakdown in the body politic. I wanted to say, just more theorizing on that, like with the left, one of the things that happened with coming back to Jupiter, Saturn, and their cycle from the 1960s. I remember doing a video on this. It was right when Jupiter entered Gemini with Saturn and Pisces. When that happened in the 1960s, literally exploded on college campuses protests over Vietnam. I mean, it was, you could just mark it exactly. And in our timeline, in our version, we had pro-Palestine, free Palestine protests everywhere, and that became a front and center issue in our world. I mean, students getting those encampments. I think the famous one in UCLA, Columbia, where they were camping, free Palestine, and then the kind of crackdowns. Like it was a literal resonance, and it was Jupiter and Gemini, Saturn and Pisces. So I'm thinking about the left. I mean, there's some convergences there where there's already been this decade that we're living in, these more so-called, I say left because it's hard to put these labels, but what I think of as
Sure.
maybe more
Hmm.
traditional left politics, massive protests for Palestine, and there's some convergences there. I think that are maybe could be ripe for some of, if there is a more anti-war movement from the left and then from the right, like how is that going to look when you start talking about the Mars retrograde? And now, real quick on the Venus retrograde, I'm about to release a video on Venus in Aries. And part of what I talk about in that is that we're back in 2018. That's the beauty and elegance of Venus. You just go back 8 years,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
that's what Venus was doing. And it's the similar synodic cycle with the sun. And 2018 was fascinating because you had Me Too. I mean, it was a huge Me Too moment. The Oscars had the Me Too actresses famously. I mean, it was like the main thing in our world. And I think that's where I'm thinking that the Epstein resonance may be, coming back here, where maybe it's not victims saying, "Hey, this happened to me," but maybe. And I've seen some talk of like Trump being under pressure because maybe there is information or there are videos or there's more about Trump. The big thing that they're talking about is that they didn't release all the files. So the
Hmm.
people on the right, going back to like those libertarian and more right-wing voices, they're angry because they still feel like they've been sold out on the Epstein files because they didn't release them or there was redactions. And so if more of that's to come, or there's more pressure around that, I mean, I think you might see resonances related to Me Too. And we're in that all year. So it's not like it
Sure.
has to be about the Venus retrograde. That could be happening at any time. And Venus is about to make an appearance on like 6 March where it's visible now. I mean, that's a real powerful Venus that we have for like the next several months. Go watch it, everybody. Go out to the night sky and look at that glowing goddess. It'll start being visible increasingly so here in March. And then all spring, like it's this spring is going to be, setting aside all this hardcore stuff we're talking about, some awesome astrology this spring, like some really amazing, like weeks of
Yeah.
really good astrology. And part of that's seeing Venus every night glowing, and it's empowering women, so yeah, that's coming back to it. Like, I think that's on my radar is like, how are these files going to continue to represent the downfall of Trump, or dissatisfaction in the body politic, such that there's fissures? And, you know, anyhow, I'm just going to say this briefly, but my theory on the Epstein files has been that it's about these three visible eclipses.
Sure.
uh,
Hmm.
and I made a video actually. I was like, okay, I'm looking for these windows in the Ptolemaic timing technique, and it all happened with this second release. To me, was like, that really was an accurate predictive model, because it predicted the fall of Epstein in 2019 with the Great American Eclipse, and then these recent ones in 2023 and 2024. It's like all of this new Epstein stuff that's come out. And so, anyhow, that was just a little bit of an aside, but yeah, that's where I'm thinking around and how that might
Yeah.
impact things.
Yeah. So when we talk about, yeah, because all that stuff's really interesting. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. I think the Epstein story actually is kind of, I don't want to say a root cause of a lot of what's going on, but I think there's a lot in there that people don't realize, like how powerful this story, or maybe people do realize how powerful this story actually is, involving maybe the igniting of, I mean, that'd be wild to think like, wow, this particular story is what ignites World War III. I mean, could you imagine, like, that's what it is, like, but it could be. I mean, this, and again, the Venus retrograde, and again, like you were saying, the Mars retrograde, there could be a lot that kind of unfolds in a lot of different ways because of just those two transits alone. But yeah, man, why don't we conclude with just some, I don't know, some just commentary for everybody on, and I think we might have even done this the last time we talked. It's almost, maybe this is like going to be our signature. Like, how do we spiritually ground and, like, you know, kind of just realize that no matter what happens in the world, we still have our own lives and healing and deeper paths to embark upon, right? And you even said something earlier just before, that there's a lot of beautiful astrology coming, like just like on paper, right? And in the sky. So like that matters in the context of human evolution, of our own growth, of our own healing and developmental journeys. And that's something I'm constantly, I feel, focusing a lot on with my work is, really trying to dive deeper into the psychological development aspect of astrology to help people, in a really, really real way, while also being woo and esoteric, because I can't help myself, of course. But there is a lot of great transits that do happen at really important times, even during dark times. So how do you use astrology, maybe number one, like if there's bad things happening in the world, but astrology can still be beautiful, like how do you integrate that? How do you like make sense of that? How do you guide people in that, you know? So maybe we'll start
Yeah,
there real quick, just with the astrology
you got it.
part. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just say I've been feeling the same way too. It's like, oh, I don't want to make another mundane video, but it's just one of my interests, and it's been something
Mm,
I've had a long, ongoing conversation with in my astrological career,
yeah,
and so it's hard for me. It's just I'm engaging it more it's a passion of mine,
sure.
and it's something that, I want to continue engaging from that level. But I've had thoughts recently of like, I'm just going to turn off, no more mundane talk from me, no more having to wade into the kind of heavy duty, intensities of reality and the politics and all of that. And I just want to shut it all down and just do more like, coaching or interpersonal, really spiritual growth and
Sure.
spiritual
Sure.
work, which for me is, I know you said earlier that astrology, I forgot what exactly what you said, astrology is a tool. Eh, my personal belief, okay, I'm getting into my personal belief now. I think all of reality is spiritual. I think consciousness itself is spiritual. I think that we are actually souls that we've been lit up into these bodies, and we're here to have an experience of soul, spirit, divinity, whatever you want to call it. Like, I think that's the
Sure.
purpose of
Hmm.
life. So, to
Hmm.
my worldview is that there's a kind of totalization through a spiritual lens of all reality, including therefore astrology becomes centrally a spiritual expression because all of reality is that. That's my personal belief. Okay, I know it's a little bit
No, I
extreme, but
agree with you. I do agree with you. Yes.
so when I think about like how do we use astrology, then it's more like first like we have to say, well, what is reality? Who am I? What does it mean to be a soul? What is existence? And without going into all of what that may or may not be, I'll just say for me, I have like a active, and I talk about this in that video. It's less about what the dogma is for me, like whether it's Jesus or Buddha or Allah or whatever. Like, and for me, it's more about an active living engagement with that part of me that that I know is accessing soul or the divine. And the way I've learned to do that in my own life is through prayer and meditation, basically, and reading, masters and reading ideas, but active, direct engagement with source or with divine energy. I say all that because I think that is how what I recommend that comes even before astrology and before anything is that we kind of have to get right with God or our conception of God or with our own souls in a times like these. And there are wise teachers out there that we can turn to aid us in that endeavor, including psychological tools like Carl Jung or other therapists or other teachers or wisdom traditions or whatever you want to assign, whatever label you want to assign to those. So go to those. That's my first recommendation and what I do. Go to those. You can see people have these mala beads. I have these because I actually do some mantras that I've learned in my journey that help me to stay centered and calm and in touch with my soul and my spiritual side. And I always have a bunch of these around so I'm reminded with a physical object, I can just touch it and I'm brought back to that spiritual connection that I use to survive day to day. Okay. So that's setting all that aside. Now we say, well, what about astrology? And my advice to folks is turn off, one, you can just turn off, you can modulate the information flows. I know that can be hard, but I talked to some people in my city who went to the coffee shop the other day. They just don't even know anything that's going on. They're like, no, I don't watch the news. They're just not like, they're not watching anything about Iran, or maybe it's just come on the TV. Like, it's just not front and center with their consciousness. And I think there can be some virtue to that if we ever need to modulate, and provided you're not in an active war zone. Or seen astrologers on Instagram, like Caught in Dubai, astrologer I know was there. Another influencer caught in Israel, trying to go to Palestine. And so, if you're not in an immediate zone where it's just like crisis planning, and then astrology may not even really help you as much. Maybe you can get a quick election to like get to the airport or something, but most of us aren't going to be in that kind of crisis level, having to make choices in an immediate sense. So I would just say turning it off. And when you turn it off, then the news, then you're left with just your life, right? And we all have stuff. Like, I have stuff going on. Meeting with you today. If this wasn't a war scenario, we'd be talking about other stuff, right? But this is an
Sure. Yeah.
obligation I have to colleagues and to the larger astrological world. Like, I'm committed to these conversations, and like the one we're having today. This is a big part of my life that has nothing to do with the war. And so I have my own chart and my transits, and I can narrativize my reality independent of the war, just with the symbols of astrology as the way to kind of restrict and invite myself into my own world. And that can be a great way to do it, a grounding. You can use the horoscope to ground into your life. And if you've done that spiritual stuff and then you bring it in to this horoscopic triggering, I mean, this is what astrology readings are, right? We can generate a list of like a to-do list, and here are the priorities based on the transits, and then you're ready to go. You got stuff to work on, And the final thing I'll just say, people probably out there, most people have people that depend on them one way or the other, whether that's children, whether that's work colleagues, parents, family. And I find in times like these, that can be a great relief to be there for the people that need me, and that can be enough. That can answer the question of why am I here? What do I do in these times? Well, who needs me? Who am I here to help? Kind of idea. So yeah, a lot of thoughts there, Joe, I know, but just kind of laying out some of my
Oh yeah,
ideas on
sure.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and I share I feel like you and I definitely share the same worldview spiritually in many, many ways. And I think even before I became an astrologer, I was very much more, I guess you can say, meditative and reflective. And astrology was just always something that I knew existed. Like I knew there was an architecture to reality that involved the natal chart or just transits involving the way reality, collective events have been shaped. So for me, I feel I've always been a deeply spiritual man before I even came to astrology. And I try to make that clear in the way I even talk in my videos sometimes that, and the reason why I say astrology is a tool, because I feel whether we chose to come into this life and the birth chart is sort of this expression of like a mission we must embark upon, or is karma in a more Buddhist or Hindu sense kind of the reality where we're meant to find a way to overcome suffering lifetime after lifetime. And so again, I look at astrology as a tool, a spiritual tool of navigation, of always being able to hopefully achieve a higher timeline. And when I say timeline, I mean like I feel through every square or opposition or challenge, there is a growth edge. There is something that we can learn from this and even detach ourselves from, which I think can be powerful and where meditation can even come in, that we don't have to identify with every little thing that happens in the world. Like we can't control what's going on in Trump's mind as he decides with his Department of War to go do that or whatever else he wants to do. All we can do is, of course, participate in however we can if we want to change politics, for example. But on a spiritual level in our everyday life, we take care of the people we love. We work on our own spiritual life by meditating or getting healthier. Like, take a look at your life, folks, and see where you need to evolve or become happier. Where are some of the blind spots you may have? And astrology for me can be, of course, a guiding light in seeing what themes of life could be activated and what could be worked on more in the current here and now. And again, just I think this deeper practice, though, of saying, like, yes, I am my chart, I am these transits that are going to unfold, but we don't know the details. We have to avoid the fatalism of it all, too, because we don't want to think the negative thing is going to happen every single time. But I think again, like you even said, and there's a deepening of prayer and meditation and detachment, and like even with the news, kind of removing oneself from the media consumption every now and then. Take those psychic breaks and clean up your psychic hygiene, and understand that humans, for the longest of time, have been dealing with harder things in the world, and at the same time, ideas and brilliant things have still manifested from that. Great ideas, great inventions. And people have always found a way to, I think, just find that peace and happiness and deeper connection to whatever that may be in their life. But yeah, but I just, from a spiritual perspective, meditation and prayer and deepening your relationship to God, the source, whatever your particular thing is. And yeah, I'm glad we share kind of the same view on that for sure. Because I think a lot of people show up in my comments and they get way too fatalist about transits or things going on in the world, or they're trying to make sense of things going on in the world through astrology alone. And that's great because again, it's allowing people to understand like, whoa, there is like a reason for this. Why is this reason? I mean, I always go back to evolution, that evolution is kind of the nucleus, it's kind of the ultimate intention of God. It's like to just constantly be experiencing and evolving, maybe, and we're kind of the vehicles of that. So however the world evolves, that's a dualistic endeavor. So duality is rough and can be rough. So how do we navigate duality? And again, prayer, meditation, understanding the deeper nature of things, the essence of experience, And I don't know, maybe that's kind of where I get way too Buddhist, and I have to sit in zazen for, an extended period of time, depending on what's going on, in the world or in my own life. But yeah, anything you'd like to add to that as we conclude? Or
Yeah, just a few more thoughts if I could.
yeah,
Just sort
sure.
of just coming off of what you had shared there, because I think I love the tool. I use it all the time, by the way. So tool is something as a concept that I think is quite useful. And I've said astrology is one tool in a toolbox. I like it when you say it's a tool. It implies there's other tools, and that's I think one of the breakthroughs of that metaphor, because we do need, and I'm glad you mentioned the people in your comments, because it does often require a lot of other tools out there to live well. And we were referring earlier to experts in geopolitics, and at least kind of being aware of some of the different ideas about how reality may unfold in that context. But this applies in a lot of areas of life that astrology speaks to. If I have a seventh house transit and I'm confused, there's people to help. I mean, there's therapists, and I can, develop better intimacy skills with ex, wise people that can help me with those topics that astrology shows me are triggered by my transits, and I can throw the astrology out and go to the experts to kind of gain wisdom. I wanted to say, let's see here. Oh, as an example, I think this may help people. Like I've just got the chart of the moment, and I know where the moon is, and I know where it is, what house it's in. So let's say if you are a Virgo rising, just as an example, and the moon's in Virgo right now, and you just had this full moon that was a eclipse there. What astrology is good at is it says, okay, well, what is the first house and what is Virgo? And that's a symbol set. It's a symbolic language where those symbols evoke ideas. And so just quickly, like Virgo could be detail orientative models. And then the first house is who am I? Self-reflective can be a first house trigger. So it might be for that person using astrology as a tool. You can just, it's literally a algorithm. That's what astrology is. It's a measurement algorithm that has a symbolic meaning set, that it's just like dialing in the algorithm, and it will spit out, okay, let me get into some of the details about who I am. And so for that person, that might help ground as they shut the news out. They just now come to the algorithm of the symbolic algorithm of astrology to get directives that can be very, very useful to help that development.
Sure.
And then the other thing, so, I was going to say one other thing on that. And if I can't remember it, I can't remember it. I guess I can't, maybe that it wasn't as useful, but yeah, I just think that folks, my heart goes out to everybody out there. I know these are times of trigger, and we need to have conversations like this, Joe. So thank you for having
Sure.
me on to speak to
Oh
you.
yeah, of course,
When
man.
you emailed me, I was like, yeah, I got to get on with Joe, because we need to have this. We need to be. I need to hear this as much as anybody else. I need to hear this wisdom that you're sharing about how to live well in at times like these. So it's I just send everybody the best of energy out there, and stay grounded. I find breathing, talking about Uranus and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius, these are air signs, the power of oxygenating through just some real basic, forget any spiritual text, just, count your breathe in and exhale out fully, and like just using the air to kind of ground. Sometimes that's helping me a lot lately. So anyhow, I won't just one
Oh yeah,
another
yeah,
quick
yeah. No,
idea there, but
true.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's the power of whatever meditation, possibly. Everyone has a different relationship to meditation. I mean, for anybody out there who wonders what my practice is, I practice primarily more of like a Zen Buddhist practice of Zazen. There's no intention whatsoever. It's literally just sit as still as you can, focus on the posture. And the idea is the posture. It's to sit as if Buddha was sitting. So the very act of sitting in a straight, structured way and breathing, you're essentially acting as an enlightened Buddha in that moment. So Zazen is literally, they call it the do nothing method. It's like you just sit and do nothing, and just that very act is the ultimate present moment you can possibly find. And if we really want to deduce what actual reality is, it's only being lived in a present moment. So everything else going on in the world is theater. And again, we're here living that and expressing that through this magic and beautiful art and tool of astrology. Because again, the stars and the heavens out there are reflecting reality within our own very being, our own life. Like, how is this even working? Right. And again, I think that's where I also, you were speaking to something about the moon before. That's also where I've been getting more and more interested over the years in certain forms of astrological magic where we can understand remediation. And again, there's a whole field involving that. But again, there is an active participatory way we can even engage in astrology for a deepening of our connection to whatever. I mean, planetary spirits, and again, but at the core of all of that is the breath of life. It is the will of the all, the one source. And again, I think meditation and breathing, the very act of breath, I think is one of the most divine things. So like you said, this idea of coming back to our breath, remembering to breathe, to detach from things that are stressful when we need to, especially world events in times of war, maybe most specifically. That's how we can become more present. And I think if we become more present, we can get out of our, chaotic minds or whatever your issues are out there, folks. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Yeah. Do you want last
Yeah,
words?
last because I
Yeah.
remembered the one last thing I
Awesome.
want to say just
All
on
right,
that,
cool.
the beauty of the breath, Joe, is that you don't
Yes.
have, it's involuntary.
Sure.
And
It
so
is.
there's no, literally you can't not breathe. I mean, try it. You'll breathe, so, but it's not something you have to ever force. It's just always happening, just like the rising sign and the rotation. We're not
Yeah.
controlling that. And there's this constantly, I'll put my software up sometimes. I just put it on the clock and I just watch the rising sign, and
Uh-huh.
it's just moving always. And so, I think about that as grounding in the present moment with the breath. Well, just throw on your software if you have one that can show that animation in real time, and just watch it move. The rotation never ceases. And the last thing I just wanted to say though was beautiful stuff can be done during times like these. And I think about Saturn and Aries, a couple of examples I just wanted to throw. Picasso paints Guernica in response to the war crimes of the fascist regime in Spain. Or actually, it was I think it was the British bombed. Oh no, it was Germany. Germany intervened to help Franco, and then they had this war crime, Guernica. I think that's correct, but that's the famous Picasso painting. Like it's an expression in response to that was able to live with us and kind of be a achievement of humanity, really a creative achievement that we still look up to as a breakthrough creatively. And then the other one is from 1967, June, which is the Beatles. The first live global simulcast was in 1967. It was called, I think, One Earth or something. And Jupiter was in Leo and Saturn was in Aries. Jupiter just entered Leo. And this is Summer of Love. Okay. But they played that awesome song, All You Need Is Love. But you can just go watch those videos. And so I just think there's the fire element, the creativity of this time. And I think a lot of people out there are going to be feeling inspired with the solar accentuation of Leo and Aries to like go into the expression of their beingness in outward displays of almost celebrations of our humanity. And I think we need it to counterbalance. Like you have these evil people in the world. Well, there's good people. And
Yeah,
we can
sure.
share our goodness, almost unabashedly. I think we'll have support for that during this time. And so just coming back to what you were saying about how to navigate, like get into your creative expression and share yourself and share the good parts of life and beingness and all of it. I mean, humans are amazing. They're beautiful and amazing people. There's darkness, but there's beautiful light. Going back to that duality you mentioned, and I think we'll have
Of
a
course.
chance to step into some of that. So,
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too, man. Well, SJ, it was an honor and a privilege, and I'm so glad you responded to the email so quickly and we were able to do this. Um, and yes, everybody, go follow SJ in all the places you can find him. Links will be down in the description box. And yeah, SJ, we'll be chatting again soon.
okay. Have a great one. Until then, Joe, thank you again. Peace to everybody.